creatively, it always just doesn't make sense to me. It's like $7,000 microphone.
Let's go out, let's record, let's get a microphone. Hi everyone, welcome to the Spotlight Academy with me, your host, Jeri Gaile. Today we're going to talk about how to set up a home studio for instrumentalists. There could be some really interesting things there, tidbits for singers as well. With me is my guest, I'm so excited, my guest Jamey Tate, who is the music director of the Spotlight program, but he's also a producer, a studio musician, an arranger, a composer, and he's a drummer. And we talk a lot about the importance of diversity in your career for longevity, and I think Jamey's like a perfect example of that. So Jamey, thank you so much for being with us.
Absolutely, I'm happy to be here. Anything for Spotlight.
Jamey, I reached out to a lot of students, our students, to find out what they were most interested in, and parents as well. And the overwhelming response was they wanted to set up a home studio to record it. And, I think these days, especially, we're spending a lot of time at home being creative, and it becomes important to find a place where you can compose and put down tracks without spending hundreds of thousands of dollars like you normally would in a recording studio. Can you talk a little bit about the basics and what type of equipment students should be thinking about getting, again, without spending a mortgage?
Yeah, a mortgage for sure. Yeah, the good news there is that, once upon a time, the only way you could record was to go into a big fancy studio. But home recording has become so prevalent now, and the prices have come down to very reasonable levels for equipment that's very good. I get calls from a lot of my colleagues about this exact question. And what I usually say is there are, 5 or 6 things that you have to be able to get rolling. The first of which you're probably looking at right now, and that's your computer. You've got to have a computer that will handle the rigors of recording. And in most cases these days, it's really not even that particularly rigorous, unless you're like me as a drummer. I have a lot of things to record. I have to, put a lot of microphones on a drum set. But for most people, let's say you're a vocalist, or if you're a trumpet player, or 1 or 2 microphones is going to do fine. So a computer doesn't even have to be all that powerful. I recommend a laptop. If you've already got one, great. I think probably the biggest question people ask me when it comes to computer is Mac versus PC. I say whatever works for you. There are softwares available for both platforms. What I will say is that, so I'm Macintosh guy. There are a lot of composers and producers I work with. Majority, I'd say overwhelmingly, are on Macintosh, but there are a lot that work on PC also. And nowadays, most software works on both. There are very few that don't. You can get a PC laptop for a lot less than you'd spend on a Mac. That said, I find that the Macs tend to be a little more stable in a lot of these, especially when I'm running big sessions with a lot of stuff. It's a little easier to run it on a Mac, but they're both perfectly viable. The next thing you need is something to get into the computer. Like, the computer itself won't record the audio unless it has something that gets it in there. So you need an interface. So basically, an interface is it's an interface in that it interfaces between analog sound, like me talking, and 1s and 0s that the computer is going to understand. So it switches it from analog to digital. You can spend a lot of money on those, or these days, again, for most people, like if you're a vocalist, you can spend $150, $200 and have a very good sounding basic interface with a mic pre in it and all of the kind of built-in stuff that you need. There's a company called Focusrite, and they make this series of them called the Scarlett series, and they have built-in mic preamps. They've got some built-in, some of them even have some effects and things built into them for not a lot of money. They sound really good, and so it's not a huge investment to be able to do that. If you're a drummer, you're going to need more inputs because you've got, like in my case on the drum set, I've got probably 12 microphones back there that record instead of just 1 or 2. So I need to have a bigger interface, and that's going to cost a little more. But generally speaking, for most people who record at home, you don't need more than 8. And so these things can be as $500 or less for even some of the more expensive ones. So that's a good way to go about it. Now, The thing you've got to figure out once you get to this point, certain ones might work a little better with certain programs. Like, what program do I record with? That is sort of the next thing on the list. So you've got a computer, you got an interface. Now you need a software to record with.
There's a lot of stuff.
It's a lot of stuff. There's only a couple more on the list though, don't worry. When you're recording into the computer, it has to go into a piece of software. And most people have probably heard the one, it's called Pro Tools. People say, oh yeah, Pro Tools this, Pro Tools that. That's kind of the industry standard for recording. I use Pro Tools for anything audio recording, but it is absolutely not the only one. And it is one of the more expensive ones. Although now, one of the great things, I think, especially for people like high school students and younger, like college students and stuff, there are programs within, or sort of plans that these software companies put together where you can monthly subscribe to the program. So instead of having to spend, $1,000 to buy Pro Tools, you can spend $30 a month. And what's nice too is that anytime the program updates, it automatically updates for you. So in a lot of ways, those subscription models are maybe a better, with less overhead or buy-in right away.
If you didn't even want to spend that, is there anything else aside from Pro Tools that maybe would be even less expensive?
If you're on a Macintosh, GarageBand comes free with the Macintosh. So I don't personally use GarageBand. It doesn't do enough for what I do, but it's basically like a stripped down version of their bigger program, which is called Logic, which I think is $200 to buy. And then you can update that too whenever basic updates come out. So that's a little bit less expensive than, say, Pro Tools. The other big ones that you see people use, and I don't know how much these cost because I don't use them. Digital Performer is another one that a lot of film composers use. And there's another one called Cubase, which again, I don't use. I don't know a lot about it, but I know for me, so I use Pro Tools for all audio. I use Logic for anything creative. If I'm creating an arrangement, if I'm programming an orchestral backing track like we did for Spotlight this year with a lot of the non-classical voice finalists had like sort of an orchestral background behind them. All of that is done in Logic for me. Something about the interface that Logic is, like the user experience makes sense to me, but that is not true of everyone. And it is okay if you don't. I always thought that Pro Tools was the clunkiest user interface for anything creative. It makes perfect sense for editing and mixing and non-creative things. But creatively, it just doesn't make sense to me. And yet, one of my dear friends who's a composer of a big television show on CBS uses Pro Tools for all his creative stuff. So it just depends on what you're most comfortable with. Sometimes a combination of both is not a bad idea either if you have certain things that you like. And the other thing I'll say, especially like with Pro Tools or maybe not more than Pro Tools, but there are different versions of it too. You can buy like the light version where it doesn't do as many functions, but it's less expensive. So doing a little research on that and maybe trial periods with a lot of the programs, if they give you a trial period and see which one you like the best. Because what you have to remember is like the software is going to basically be like the shoes you wear every day. Like no matter what computer you have, no matter what microphone, no matter all that stuff, the software is the thing you're interacting with on a daily basis. So make sure that you're comfortable with whatever software you're going to use,
That makes sense.
Yeah.
What about acoustics? Because that's everything.
Yeah, I mean, acoustics, this is the funny thing. I just had a conversation through social media with a friend, colleague, who's a cello player in town. And she, since the lockdown has started and since we've had this COVID situation, everybody's scrambling to try to figure out how to be able to keep working. She invested a pretty hefty sum of money in a really expensive microphone and a good preamp and a nice computer and did all that stuff and had been working and decided at some point she wanted to expand what she could offer a composer that were to call her. And she wanted to get a room mic and was asking about what type of microphone she should get for that. And I said, well, hold on a second. Before you mic your room, does your room sound good? Very seldom, without a lot of investment, time, whatever, does a room sound good. Like when you walk in, if your room sounds like an empty room with like, when you clap your hands, it goes, all that stuff, that's not going to be a good acoustic source to record, or acoustic environment to record your source. So some basic things, like if you've got a room that's not bad and you just need to calm it down a little bit, things like that.
Yeah, but how do you know if it's like, I mean, aside from like, how do you walk into a room and know whether the room is good?
When you talk, does it sound good to your ear? When you play your instrument in the room, does it sound good? You know, the thing you're not gonna fix, and this is something that I think is important to mention, the thing you're not gonna fix without significant financial investment is sound transfer. These are two different things. People go, oh yeah, I put some blankets up in my room to soundproof it. That doesn't soundproof anything. When we talk about like a trash truck driving by, no matter how many blankets you put up in your room, you're still gonna hear it. If you're playing drums in your bedroom and you put blankets up, the next bedroom, you're still going to hear it. So that's not going to change. But what does change, if you hang a bunch of blankets on the wall, say you invest in, and I think this is a good investment for a home recording person who doesn't want to spend a ton of money, get some moving blankets. You can hang them on the wall. And if you don't have a lot of space or you have a room that's not great, the best thing you can do is basically calm the room down, like deaden the room. Don't go so dead that it sounds like you can't hear anything in there anymore, but just deaden the room enough so that the ugly parts of the room don't wind up in your microphones. You know, I mean, example in here, like everything that you see behind me is acoustic treatment. You know, all of those shelving units and stuff back there, they all have insulation in them, and everything is a big, you know, this room, but I've spent months building this thing and, you know, a lot of money putting it together. We can't all do that, you know, so.
And you're a professional.
Well, I like to think I am. Some days I am. So the point is, like, you work with whatever you've got. So from an acoustic standpoint, being able to hang something on a wall, if you've got a big window in a room, make sure you can cover over that window because glass sounds terrible, you know, little basic things like that. Moving blankets are your friend. And to go along with that, one of the other things you need to get when you're putting this together is obviously you've got to have a microphone or two or whatever. There are a lot of inexpensive options for microphones now, and they range in quality. Typically speaking, the more you spend on a microphone, the better it's going to be. There are some good inexpensive options, but if you don't have a great room, don't spend a lot of money on a really expensive microphone because you're going to hear more of the not so great room because they're more sensitive.
Oh, that makes sense.
Right? For the longest time, I kept feeling like I needed to buy more expensive microphones, but I didn't have a great room in previous studios before I built this one.
Can you get away with a less expensive microphone if you have a really good room tone?
Once you've got a really great room, you're going to want to use it. Okay. You're going to want a better microphone. Like once I built...
What's the range like of cost?
Oh, geez. Well, let's see. I mean, if I'm looking around here, like, well, that right there, that's like $7,000 microphone. But I have other microphones, like what are up here, are like $500 a piece.
Can we get anything less than that that's good quality?
There are decent microphones that you can buy for a couple $100.
Really?
There's a company called Gauge microphones. I actually kind of like them. You know, they're $200 or $250 a piece. You know, they're not terribly expensive. And I used those for a long time. Before I had a room that sounded good that I wanted to do more with, then I decided to start investing in better microphones. The other part of it is there's a thing called a preamp. Mm-hmm. You don't need to immediately spend a lot of money on, but that's another part of if you have a decent microphone and a pretty good preamp, that can help that microphone a bit. But again, that's something that you're going to do down the line. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
One thing I want to quickly point out, and I dealt with this recently for you recording at home people. If you buy a microphone, make sure that you buy an appropriate mic stand. Oh. Because no matter how much you spend on that microphone, it was an investment. And if you put it on a cheapo microphone stand and it falls over and breaks, then you've wasted your money. The first thing I did when I started buying very expensive microphones was bought some really good microphone stands, because you can't put a $2,000 microphone on a $25 stand and expect nothing bad will happen. You know what I mean? Real,
I never even thought about that. It can fall over and the microphone can break.
Yeah, I broke a $2,000 microphone not that long ago, and that hurt. So
that's a bummer.
So when you
talk about a stand, you want one that's like really weighted at the bottom.
Something with a heavy base, and a good inexpensive way around that. You can buy a cheaper mic stand, but then get the
sandbags.
Yeah, sandbags to put on the bottom of it. So if you happen to bump into it, it's not going to fall over. It'll, but keep the weight down there on the bottom of the microphone stand. I learned that the hard way. You don't want to go through that. It's a good pitfall to avoid. Yeah.
Okay, so what's the process of now we've got the equipment and we're setting it up? What do we do?
Well, once you have everything, the more comfortable you get with your gear, like goof around with it a lot. I mean, a lot. Like go in and try different positions for a microphone, knowing that, and here's some microphone nerdery, but there's a thing called proximity effect. And the closer the microphone gets to the source, the more like low end you'll get out of it. So you want to find a good balance. Like if you got it too close to the source, it's going to sound real woofy and bottomy. If you sound it too far away, it'll sound puny. So you find a good spot for the microphone where
the Goldilocks of the microphone.
Goldilocks zone of microphones. That is correct. So goof around with that. Also think about where within your room it sounds the best. You know, in this case, I've designed the room to sound a certain way, but if you're in your bedroom, maybe that corner sounds better than that corner. So try different things, goof around with all of that so that when you're ready to record, you don't have to mess with a lot of stuff. Think about, how hot your levels are recording, all of that kind of stuff. Like, don't go too high so that you peak, and don't go too low so that you get a lot of noise. So you'll work all those things out. You get comfortable with your equipment. And then it comes down to just being creative. Then the fun part starts. When you've got all this stuff put together, then you get to start creating music. And in my case, it's partly about creating. A lot of the time for me, because this is what I do professionally all the time, it's about providing a really great product for another client. Somebody will send me a recording and a tempo that without, there are no drums in it. So it'll just be like an MP3 or a WAV file or something of a song with no drums. They'll send me the tempo and I put it into Pro Tools, and hopefully they're pro enough to have sent me a sheet music, also a PDF, and I'll put all the drums on and send it back. That's a huge part of how I make a living now. A huge part of it. So I never see that person. And so you start to develop a system with how you get used to doing that. Get in there, making sure all of your, audio stuff is right. It's at the right bit rate. It's at the right sample rate. And the more you get comfortable with your programs, you can do all of those things pretty easily. And then you'll develop a workflow. The same goes though, let's say you're going to create something and you're going to send it off to someone else who's going to record at home, making sure that you have all those ducks in a row that you're able to send off. Another thing that's useful to point out, and since we're recording at home, make sure you have a decent set of headphones, because, you can't play back something on speakers while you're recording it, because then it ends up in the microphone. And if you have to choose, in my opinion, for home recording, if you've got to choose between buying a set of speakers or buying a set of headphones, go with the headphones, because you can use those for more things. You'll get tired of wearing them all the time. I obviously have both, and I jump back and forth, but if I had to choose one or the other, I'd get a good set of headphones so that I can record with them on, but then I can also mix and I can get an idea of what everything sounds like if I'm mixing something at home. Ideally, you want a decent set of speakers too, but that can be something you can do down the road once you've established what your process is and how it all works. But make sure you've got at least one good set of headphones. Another really great skill for all of us to have is music copying, understanding how to use Finale or Sibelius or Dorico, I think is the other one. The Finale is my primary music production software, for sheet music.
What does that mean, music copying? What do you mean?
Music copying means the actual printing of music. So a copyist is someone who takes a score, for example, and puts all of those parts onto individual parts that then the orchestra would play. That's like the job of a copyist, and a music prep person. So if you have Finale and you learn how to use it proficiently, whatever you've composed, say you've composed a piece of music in Logic, you can export that into Finale and then have it all printed out beautifully to look like someone could actually play that piece, and then you can send them a PDF, and there you go.
Finale sounds expensive, Jamey.
It's actually not that bad. What was it last time I bought it? I think it was maybe a couple $100.
Yeah, but now we're talking about a couple $100 for this, $300 for that. Is there anything else besides Finale that we could use?
Finale has a smaller version called Print Music, and I want to say it's got to be under $100. It might be $75 or something.
Okay.
There are definitely options that are on the less expensive side of all of these things, and I would encourage people to just do their research, especially if you're just starting out. Something like Print Music is fine because but it's never going to be as powerful as the more expensive programs. But if you and I did this, I started there with, and in fact, I did that kind of with all these things. I started with very inexpensive microphones in a crappy little room in my garage that I built in Pasadena when I lived out there, and had crappy mic stands and bought inexpensive cables and did, because that was all I could do. And then as I would get better at what I was doing, I would put a little money into this or put a little money into that. And eventually you get to the point where you've got, a rack.
The $7,000 microphone.
Exactly. You've got the fancy stuff, but if you don't need it, don't spend the money on it. And eventually, if you do need it, then it'll present itself as like, okay, now it's time. For most of us, I think about, especially the vocalists out there, spending a little bit of money on a good microphone is a good investment, but you don't have to go crazy on a computer. You don't have to go crazy on an interface. You don't have to go crazy on a lot of things. Think about the thing that's going to get you the most bang for your buck.
Okay. Okay.
Drummers have it the worst.
I know.
We have it the worst. I mean, you can't record a drum set with fewer than 4, and even that is generally not enough. I mean, I use 12 inputs just about every time I record the drums. So you think about that. Even if that was at $100 a piece for microphones, that's $1,200 just in mics. It does get pretty expensive pretty fast.
Yeah, really. Yeah. Okay, last question. What are the pitfalls, the challenges? Like, what should we avoid, and how do we get around it?
Well, I mentioned a couple of them already. Like, acoustics of the room are a big pitfall. As much time as you can, and as much it doesn't even have to be a financial investment, but as much time and energy as you can put into trying to make your space sound good enough to record in. That's a big one. I just recently, I was working on, there's a saxophone player that a lot of people know, Dave Kaz. He came over and we were working on his new album. And somebody sent a file, I've even forgotten what instrument it was now, recorded very poorly. So we ended up having to redo it, which costs time, it costs money, it costs a lot of other things. So if you're putting things together to record at home, make sure that, your space sounds good, that you know how to, get into there's a great book, Contemporary Microphone Techniques, I believe it's called. Mix Magazine published it years ago. And it gives you some really basic ideas on how to put a microphone in front of an instrument to make it sound good. Because I feel like that's probably the number one thing. People buy all this gear and they sit at home and they're like, push record, and then they get terrible sounds because they don't know where to put the microphone. They don't know about making a room sound good. And I mentioned earlier, like, spend time goofing around with your equipment. You will frustrate yourself to no end if you don't really know how to use what you've got, and you'll try to do things and it won't work. And then you spend hours on something that should take you 10 minutes. And then taking care of your equipment, it's an investment. It's real easy to get careless with your stuff when you got it lying around and you want to try a different miking position and you're going to just put the microphone stands over there. Next thing you know, one of them falls over and your mic's broken. And now you're out, maybe it's 200, maybe it's 7,000, whatever. That's not a fun thing to do. Those are sort of the biggest pitfalls, I think, for most home recording things is those acoustics, making sure you take care of your gear and make sure you know how your gear operates as much as possible. You don't have to be, there are engineers out there, the big famous guys, the Al Schmitts and the Clark Germains and the really famous guys that have made their life's passion engineering. And they would have a lot to say, I'm sure, even about what I'm telling you. But what I'm telling you is just purely from a working at home standpoint. We're not engineers. We are creative artists, first and foremost. The more, and you mentioned this at the very beginning, like the more you can diversify, the more you can learn how to do in your career, the more opportunity you'll have, especially once you get out of college and you start entering the workforce. I know for me, the fact that I can write music and arrange, and I can record and I can produce records and I can still play the drums has afforded me a career even when a lot of my colleagues are really hurting. So all of these things, the more you can do to diversify, the better off you're going to be. And the more control you have over the end product. If you're a creative artist and you're creating your own product, you're making your own record, you're making your own, video, whatever, the more knowledge you have about all those things, the more control you'll have over the end product.
That's fantastic advice, and I've learned so much, and I hope all of you have learned a lot with this as well. So I'm so grateful. Thank you so much. If any of the students, if you guys have any questions, you can always email us at spotlight@musiccenter.org. And I can get those questions to Jamey. And let's go out, let's record, let's get a microphone, let's get Pro Tools, let's get it all. Jamey, thank you so much for being with us.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
Want to see more videos like this? Yeah, of course you do. Please like and subscribe to our YouTube channel right here and visit us at the Music Center offstage at our website, musiccenter.org. Until next time.